A freedom fighter who died while planning an uprising to free enslaved people in Charleston, Denmark Vesey, is celebrated today for his bravery. And this July, the Charleston Gaillard Center is partnering with Mother Emanuel and the soon-to-open International African American Museum to mark the bicentenary of his attempted revolt. Well, joining us with more is Lee Bennett Jr., historian at Mother Emanuel AME Church. And we'd also like to welcome back Dr. Tonya Matthews, President and CEO of the International African American Museum. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So this is a very special commemoration of a man who lived and died in Charleston. We were just talking a moment ago that his story has not necessarily broken across state lines as much as you would think he did, knowing what his story is. So first and foremost, maybe you can tell us, Dr. Matthews, just what it is about Denmark Vesey's story that is so important for people to know.
Sure, I think you make a really good point about it not breaking across state lines. Arguably, even within the state lines, we have some telling of the story to do. But I think you're talking about an enslaved man who had the opportunity to purchase his freedom, and he did, then started his own business, got involved in community and in church, and then still was not satisfied when other members of his family were not free, when other members of his community were not free. And so if we think about that collective responsibility, that urging for freedom for all, I think it's a really powerful story, and frankly, quintessentially an American story.
Yes,
I mean, I know these are challenging times, but you know that's part of our mantra, that we believe in freedom.
Absolutely, and you mentioned churches, and Lee, maybe you can talk a little bit more about what you're imparting within the church itself, within Mother Emanuel, and how that church is tied to Denmark Vesey's story and history.
Well, certainly the history. Denmark Vesey was a member of the Hampstead congregation, which was the precursor to Emanuel AME Church. And certainly he was a noted member there and led the planned slave insurrection of 1822. But as a result of that plan being disclosed, you had about 131 people arrested, 93 going to trial, 38 were released for lack of evidence, and you have 26 acquitted. But 11 of those 26 who were acquitted were deemed so dangerous by this tribunal that they were sent into permanent exile out of the United States. And then you had 35 who were executed. They were hung.
Including
so Denmark Vesey and 5 others hung on July the 2nd of 1822. And then 22 men all hung at the same time on July the 26th of 1822 as well.
So his impact, though, on not just Charleston, but also history itself is quite tremendous. So moving forward, how do we now bring his story into the greater view, the greater consciousness of this country?
I think you've started to even do that a bit yourself in the introduction, as we call him a freedom fighter, an abolitionist, a revolutionary. I think one of the things we can take credit for on the journey to doing better is acknowledging that is a re-acknowledgement of his story and the role and the language that we're using to describe him. And I think that in these current times when maybe some of us who have a home or have our business are trying to figure out, well, what is my role in all of this conversation that's happening? I think this is a story that says, just being okay yourself, it's still okay to raise your voice and to speak up on behalf of other folks who are perhaps not quite as, quote, free as you are.
We were having a conversation earlier about the fact that when you talk to people about Denmark Vesey, probably 9 out of 10 would say, I've never heard of Denmark Vesey. So it's a start to being able to tell that story and to tell that part of history as well. By having a monument, now we have discussions that are taking place as well too about who is this individual, and having an opportunity to kind of dispel some of the misinformation and provide information that puts him in a different light as to who he was historically as a freedom fighter, as a liberator. And so the more we are able to have those discussions, the more we can continue to grow together.
Because when you mentioned disinformation, you do have 2 schools of thought. One school is that he was a freedom fighter, the other is that he was a criminal. So so when you are kind of faced with that I guess, view. So how would you argue?
So it's interesting. I think two things. One, I think of the African proverb, hunters will be heroes until lions become historians. And so now that there are more people engaged in telling the story, but I also think that this is still part of what we do. There were those that called the folks that fought the American Revolution terrorists and insurrectionists, and they were rebelling against something. I think what he was fighting for is the ultimate, quote unquote, decider. He was fighting for freedom, for his freedom and the freedom of others. And I think that is the way to tell the story. And then we can get into the nuances. Then we can get into, I think, the impact. But to your earlier point, when we think about education, stories stick with us. And it is a remarkable story at the end of the day of a man who decided to risk it all for the lives of others.
He certainly did. And there are going to be 3 days of events that are going to be marking his bicentennial. And so that starts on Thursday night, and you're going to have a panel discussion, which you're going to be a part of. So people can come and see that. And then there's also going to be music and other ways that the community can come together and to continue learning about. So where do people find out more information on those upcoming events?
Sure. So you can go to the Gaillard's website. You can also go to the International African American Museum's website. I hope that you can go anywhere and everywhere and find out information. You can buy your tickets separately. You can buy them together. There's also a wonderful free family event that's also included that includes music and poetry and a pop-up bookshop that we hope folks will enjoy.
I want to thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
We're back after this.